Have you ever felt like your whole world collapsed because of just one message? Zuri, a gentle baker in a quiet seaside town, thought she had it all until she saw a heart emoji sent from her best friend to her husband. That same night, a car accident left her unable to walk. Her husband drifted away, her best friend betrayed her, and the life she built began to crumble. But in her darkest moment, a letter arrived from a lawyer, a hidden inheritance worth millions. The only condition? She must keep it a secret. For 6 months. This is not fiction. This is based on a real case documented by Turner Law Office, one of the most discreet firms handling confidential legacies. What Zuri did next turned her pain into power. By the end of this video, you'll discover how she rebuilt her life with just a few online pastry sales, why she forgave but never rescued those who broke her, and how she created the Second Chance Bakery for others like her. She lost her legs, her love, her trust, but she gained something greater. On her opening day, reporters asked how she survived it all. She smiled and said, "Sometimes God takes your legs so you can find your wings." Don't scroll past. If you've ever felt broken or betrayed, this story might just be your turning point. And hey, before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from today? I'd love to send you the warmest greeting from Zuri's little bakery by the sea. Before dawn, the kitchen was already awake. The sound of whisking filled the small apartment like a heartbeat trying to prove it was still alive. Cinnamon and sugar drifted through the air, clinging to the curtains, to her skin, to everything that had ever known warmth. Zuri stood by the counter in her faded nightshirt, hair tied back, hands white with flour. The dim yellow bulb above her head buzzed quietly, flickering with the rhythm of her movements. Outside, the world was still asleep, wrapped in the comfort she couldn't feel anymore. She pressed her palms into the dough, firm but gentle, like she was trying to remember what tenderness felt like. Her breath misted in the cool air. The windowpane was fogged from the oven's heat, her reflection trembling in it. A woman shaped by habit, by care, by a kind of love that used to mean something. The phone vibrated on the counter, sharp and sudden. It wasn't hers. Cato's screen glowed faintly in the dark, painting his sleeping face with ghostlight. She turned slightly, just enough to catch the curve of his lips as he smiled in his sleep. A quiet smile. Then she saw it, the message still open from the night before. "I miss you so much, Nia." Her hands froze. A dusting of flour fell, slow as snow, onto the floor. The smell of cinnamon turned too sweet, almost nauseating. For a moment, she didn't move. Her body was there, but her soul felt like it had stepped outside into the rain that hadn't started yet. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she reached for the tray, pulled out the first batch of rolls, and placed them carefully into the box. Her fingers trembled as she tied the red ribbon, each knot tighter than the last, as if trying to hold herself together. When she stepped outside, dawn had barely touched the sky. The street was empty, washed in the pale blue of almost morning. The first raindrop hit her cheek like a warning, then another. Soon the whole world was whispering in rain. The sugar on the buns began to melt, streaking down the lid of the box like tears she refused to shed. She looked up, feeling the drizzle turn cold. Maybe happiness, she thought, is just sugar that melts in the rain. The neighborhood woke slowly, doors opening, voices calling out, the scent of wet earth and coffee. They waved to her as they always did. "Morning, Zuri. You're up early again." She smiled because she knew how, because she'd trained herself to. But something had cracked quietly inside her. Invisible, soundless, final. Later that morning, she returned to the kitchen, everything in its usual place, the counter clean, the air warm, Cato's laughter drifting from the shower. She stared at his phone again, now face down, screen dark. She could almost hear the echo of that message in her head. "I miss you so much, Nia." She touched the counter for balance. The wood felt cool under her fingertips. A small detail, but it grounded her. She'd lived her whole life noticing small things, the way bread rose in the oven, how rain changed the smell of flour, how someone's tone softened before a lie. And this morning, she felt all of them at once. The world had gone slightly off key, and only she could hear it. Cato came into the kitchen, towel around his waist, water dripping down his chest. "You're up early again," he said, pretending to be light. "Couldn't sleep," she answered, her voice steady but thin. He reached for a bun, kissed her cheek absently. The contact was warm but empty, like touching the memory of someone, not the person themselves. He didn't notice her eyes following him as he left the room. He didn't see the way she stood there afterward, still holding the knife that had just sliced the last roll. The blade reflected the morning light, trembling slightly. She placed it down carefully. That night, the rain returned. Harder this time, drumming against the roof like something trying to break in. Zuri sat at the kitchen table, watching the oven glow. She could hear Cato in the next room, his voice low, laughing. She didn't need to check the phone to know who he was talking to. The rhythm of his laughter told her everything. She reached for the dough again. Her hands moved automatically, shaping, folding, pressing. It was almost peaceful. Until she realized she wasn't baking for the neighborhood anymore. She was baking because it was the only place where her body remembered what control felt like. The smell of cinnamon filled the air again, familiar and strange. She closed her eyes. In that moment, memory bled into the present. The day she'd first opened her bakery stall. The first time Cato had surprised her with flowers. The way he'd said "us" like it was a promise carved into time. Now it felt like all of that had been baked over. Sweet crust, hiding something burnt underneath. The timer beeped. She opened the oven and froze. The batch had collapsed, the dough sagging like lungs that had given up mid-breath. She stared, then laughed quietly, a sound caught between pain and disbelief. "Of course," she whispered, her breath fogging the oven door. Cato's voice carried from the next room. "What's wrong?" She turned her head toward the sound but didn't answer. "Nothing," she said softly, but what she meant was everything. Later, she stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker through the rain. The kitchen smelled like sugar and smoke. She thought about how love was supposed to make people warmer, but all she felt was cold radiating from the inside out. In the silence, she noticed small details again. The crack in the tile by her foot, the rhythm of drops hitting the window, the faint hum of the fridge. Each sound was sharper than usual, like her senses were recalibrating to a new kind of loneliness. Then a sound broke the rhythm. Cato's phone buzzing on the counter. One message, then another, then another. She didn't move, but her eyes followed the light, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. It cast shadows on the wall, long and trembling. She could have ignored it. She almost did. But something deeper, older, made her reach for it, not to read, but to turn it face down again. When she touched the screen, it unlocked. Nia's face appeared, smiling, alive, familiar. Zuri's thumb hovered over the glass. She didn't scroll, didn't open the messages. She just stared. And for the first time, she saw herself reflected faintly over that image. Two women, one unaware, one unraveling. She set the phone down gently, like placing a fragile truth she wasn't ready to confront. Then she walked to the stove and turned the flame higher. The air grew warmer, denser, like the room was closing in. Something inside her whispered, "Don't burn yourself trying to prove you're warm." The rain eased. Outside, the street was silver with puddles reflecting streetlights. Inside, Zuri sat back down, her palms still dusted with flour. She looked at the box of rolls cooling on the counter, perfect on the surface, hollow underneath. In that silence, something shifted. She realized it wasn't the affair that broke her. It was the moment she saw him smile at someone else, that small, unguarded joy she used to believe belonged only to her. She reached for a roll, bit into it. Sweet, soft, warm. But the warmth didn't reach her chest. It stopped somewhere between her throat and her heart, like a truth she couldn't swallow. In the distance, thunder rolled. The window shook lightly. She imagined for a second that the world outside was trying to speak to her, to warn her, to wake her, to say, "You already know." The phone buzzed again. One more message. Her gaze flicked toward it, then back to the window. The reflection of the glowing screen blurred with the rain. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Not yet." Minutes passed. The rain grew softer. The smell of cinnamon lingered, mixing with the faint bitterness of something scorched. The air carried it, sweetness and smoke, love and ruin. Zuri stood and wiped the counter clean, every motion precise, ritualistic. The act steadied her. Outside, a stray cat darted under the eaves, shaking off the rain. She watched it disappear into the dark. By the time she turned off the lights, the kitchen looked untouched, spotless, calm, pretending. She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame, and looked back once more. The glow from the oven faded, leaving only the faint trace of warmth against the cold tiles. She walked toward the window, opened it slightly, and let the damp air in. The night smelled of rain, cinnamon, and something ending. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. Not for anyone else to hear, just for the room, the rain, and herself. "Maybe everything warm," she said, "was never real to begin with." The words vanished into the quiet, swallowed by the steady rhythm of rain. Zuri stood under the eave, holding the last box of pastries. Steam rose faintly through the drizzle, blurring her face in the reflection of the glass door. For a heartbeat, it looked like she was fading too. A woman made of breath and flour and heartbreak, dissolving back into the storm. She tightened her grip on the box. It was still warm, warm enough to hurt, warm enough to remind her she could still feel. The streetlight flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere behind her, the phone buzzed again. One last pulse of light in the dark. She didn't turn around. The night held its breath, and in that breath, something fragile began to change. The chapter closed on the sound of rain hitting sugar, a soft hiss, a quiet surrender. And Zuri, standing alone beneath the dripping roof, realized she wasn't numb anymore. She was awake. The rain hadn't stopped all day. By the time Zuri pulled out of the alley behind the bakery, her windshield was a veil of silver streaks, wipers working hard to clear the chaos. The last box of cinnamon rolls rested in the passenger seat beside her, still warm, wrapped in wax paper and twine. Streetlights flickered above like tired eyes blinking against the storm. She adjusted the rearview mirror, even though no one was behind her. Old habits. The night smelled of wet asphalt and engine heat. She took the corner slow. The tires hissed on the flooded pavement. Her hands were cold on the wheel. The heater had long given up. Her breath fogged the glass, and with each exhale she had to wipe a small patch clear to see the road ahead. The city was shrinking in on itself. Buildings faded into fog, outlines blurred by sheets of water. She knew this route like the back of her hand, but that night it felt unfamiliar, like the street had forgotten her. Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She didn't reach for it. Couldn't. A part of her already knew who it was, and why. The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. The intersection ahead glowed faintly red, distorted through the wet. She pressed the brakes. Too late. The world lunged forward, a scream of rubber. A white flash, like a camera going off inside her skull. Then nothing. Silence. No sound, no feeling, just white. When she opened her eyes, she was floating. Or so it seemed. The hospital ceiling hovered above her like a sheet of paper, too white, too clean, too far away. She blinked, tried to speak. Nothing came out. A beeping sound began to rise beside her. Machines. The dull ache at the base of her skull throbbed with every pulse. Her mouth tasted like metal. Her limbs didn't respond. A face leaned over her, brown eyes framed by tired lines and a clean white coat. "You're in the hospital," the man said gently. "There was a car accident. You hit a pole. The impact was strong." Zuri tried to move. Her legs didn't answer. The doctor hesitated, then continued. "There's spinal trauma, severe. We'll know more in a few days, but it's possible you may not walk again." The sentence landed like a door slamming in a quiet house. She blinked again, swallowed. Behind the doctor, a figure appeared, Cato, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear. He rushed to her side, dropped to his knees. "Zuri," he said, voice cracking. "Oh my God, baby, I thought I lost you." His hands cupped hers. They were warm, trembling, but when she looked into his eyes, truly looked, she saw something hollow. Not grief, not guilt. Obligation. And something worse, pity. She stared at him until he looked away. The days blurred. Beeps and fluorescent lights. Nurses with kind smiles and measured voices. Visitors who brought flowers they knew wouldn't be smelled. Get-well cards stacked like apologies. But the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the stillness, the waiting, the knowing. When she was wheeled out of the hospital 2 weeks later, the world looked different. Not because of the chair beneath her, but because of how people saw her now. Their eyes hesitated, their voices softened. Even the ones who used to envy her morning deliveries, who'd once joked about stealing her secret cinnamon recipe, they now smiled too wide, too long. Kato held the door open to their apartment with forced cheer. "I got everything set up, see? Cleared the living room. We'll move the bedroom in here for now. I watched a video on accessibility. I've been learning." Zuri nodded, rolled herself in. The scent of home should have comforted her. Cinnamon, soap, warmth. But it didn't. Because the kitchen, the heart of her life, now stood just out of reach. The counter too high, the oven handle too far. The mixer mocked her from its shelf. Kato noticed her staring. "Don't worry about that now," he said, placing a blanket over her knees. "Just rest. I got it all handled." But he didn't cook. He didn't know her flour from her sugar. He didn't know what it meant to have your hands in dough at sunrise, to feel needed not just by someone, but by the act of creating. Days passed, long gray days filled with reruns and pills. Kato came and went, always in a hurry. His hugs were shorter now. His eyes rarely met hers. Sometimes at night, she'd hear him in the other room, whispering, laughing softly. She didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. One afternoon, she asked if he could bring her a bag of flour. "For what?" he said too quickly. "I mean, shouldn't you take it easy?" "I just want it here." "Zuri," he sighed. "Come on, let's not pretend things are the same." She didn't respond, just stared at the blank TV screen, her reflection dim in the glass. The silence stretched. Finally, he said, "I'll get it tomorrow," but he didn't. That night, the storm returned. Wind rattled the windows. Rain slapped the glass in waves. She sat in the dark, lit only by the flicker of streetlights through the curtains. Kato had gone out to run errands. Hours passed. When he came home, his hair was dry. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume. He said nothing, just walked past her into the bathroom. She listened to the shower run, then watched as his phone, left on the table, lit up with a message. She didn't look. She didn't need to. The next morning, she asked him to help her sit by the kitchen. He hesitated, then did. She stared at the counter, so familiar yet distant. "I want to try," she said. He laughed, softly, but it cut deep. "Try what?" "To bake." His face darkened. "Zuri, don't. You'll hurt yourself. You can't." "I can try." He shook his head, looked away. "I just want to feel like myself again," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You'll never be the same." She didn't answer, didn't move, just sat there, hands in her lap, heart breaking slowly. Later that day, when he left, she rolled herself into the kitchen alone. The effort drained her. Sweat clung to her temples, her arms trembled, but she made it. With shaking fingers, she reached for the bowl, pulled it into her lap, poured the flour. It spilled. She didn't care. Eggs cracked too loudly. Milk sloshed onto her legs, her apron stained. The mixer growled. The batter clung to her fingers like it remembered her. The oven took forever to preheat. She slid the tray in, arms burning, then waited. The smell filled the room, cinnamon and hope. But when she pulled it out, the rolls had burnt. Blackened edges. Bitter centers. She stared at them, then laughed. A hollow, cracked sound. And that's when it happened. Kato's phone, left on the counter, began to ring. She froze, then picked it up. A voicemail from Nia. Her voice soft, intimate, casual, like they spoke often. "I know you're with her. Just don't forget why you started this. You can't live with someone broken, Kato. You're not that kind of man." Zuri listened, then played it again. And again, then placed the phone back carefully. She turned to the tray. Tears fell, not loud, not messy, just enough to sting. She picked up a cloth, cleaned the counter, swept the flour, stacked the trays, then sat still. Her heart pounded with something new. not rage.
Resolve.
The oven ticked softly as it cooled. She looked down at her hands, still dusted with flour. Her legs might have failed her, but her spirit hadn't. Outside, the rain had slowed. Inside, the silence deepened. And Zuri, seated in the kitchen that once defined her, realized something quietly devastating. Cato was still here, but he had already left. The TV clicked on in the next room, its glow reflected on the wall like a distant fire. She watched his shadow move across it, then disappear. And for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to feel it. Not just the grief of what was lost, but the emptiness of what remained. You will receive the full chapter shortly. The fire alarm screamed. Smoke curled through the kitchen in slow, bitter ribbons, winding up toward the ceiling like prayers gone unanswered. Zuri sat frozen in her chair, one hand still gripping the wooden spoon, the other pressed hard against her thigh where hot batter had splashed minutes ago. Her breath came shallow, her eyes burned, and the smell, acrid, sharp, a betrayal, filled every inch of the room she used to call sanctuary. The tray of rolls blackened in the oven like forgotten promises. Sweet cinnamon turned to ash, sugar scorched into charcoal. She didn't even hear the door open. "What the hell?" Cato's voice sliced through the smoke. "Zuri!" She didn't turn her head, didn't move. The wheelchair held her like a cradle now, safe, but caged. Cato rushed across the kitchen, ripped the oven door open, grabbed the tray with a towel, and hurled it into the sink. Steam hissed, metal cracked. He turned back toward her, arms wide in exasperation. "Why would you even try this? You could have set the whole place on fire." She blinked. Her ears still rang from the alarm. She reached slowly toward the stovetop and turned the burner off. Click. Silence followed. Not peace. Just the kind of quiet that made grief echo louder. "I wanted to make something," she said softly, "for me. You should have waited until I got back. You don't have to prove anything." She looked at him, really looked, and saw it again. That flicker in his eyes. Not love, not worry, annoyance, suffocation. Like he was drowning in a life he hadn't signed up for. "I'm not proving anything," she whispered. "I'm trying to remember who I was." He rubbed his face with both hands, took a step back, then another. The smoke alarm chirped once more, then fell mercifully quiet. Cato turned away from her and reached for his phone. The screen lit up his face in a familiar way. Zuri watched from across the room. Her heart beat slow and hard. She knew that look, that smirk, that half-happy, half-guilty thing he did when he thought no one was watching. Her pulse jumped, not from jealousy, not even from rage, but from recognition. It was the same smile he'd once saved for her. A ping echoed in the silence. She couldn't see the screen, didn't need to. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, listening. Cato turned his back. His voice dropped low. He laughed. She closed her eyes. The voice came faintly, tinny through the speaker. Not his, a woman's, breathless, amused. "You can't live with someone broken, Cato. You're not that kind of man." Zuri inhaled sharply. Her ribs burned from the motion. He hadn't hung up. He thought he had, or maybe he didn't care. She opened her eyes, staring at the smudged cabinet door in front of her. Her reflection warped in the glossed wood. Not a woman anymore, not fully. Not to him, just a weight, a project, a responsibility. Cato slipped out the back door a few minutes later, muttering something about air. She didn't answer, didn't need to. The door slammed, and the vibration traveled through the floorboards to her spine like a shudder. She sat in the smoke-filled silence, then moved. Slowly, carefully, she wheeled herself toward the counter. Her arms shook, but she made it. She picked up the burnt tray from the sink. It was still hot. She held it anyway, just enough to feel it. Then she set it down and stared at the charred buns. One of them still held its shape, a little less ruined than the rest. She picked it up. It crumbled slightly in her hand. Her thumb left a floury print on its edge. She bit into it. It was bitter, dry, dead. And she chewed anyway. Not because she wanted to taste it, but because she needed to remember what failure felt like, to feel its weight on her tongue, to swallow it down and sit with it. She finished it, every bite. Then she cried, not loud, not shaking, Just tears, slow and heavy, sliding down her cheeks and falling into her lap like drops of oil in water. Unmixable, uninvited. But there, she pulled a dishcloth from the drawer and began wiping down the counter, one stroke at a time, the same way she used to after a good bake, not out of shame, not to erase the mess, but to claim it, to mark this place again. The flour on the floor dusted her wheels. The scent of burnt sugar clung to her skin. She didn't mind. When she reached for the broom, her fingers brushed something small and hard under the table. She looked down. Cato's phone. He must have dropped it. She stared at it. Her reflection bloomed in the black screen. She reached down, picked it up, and held it in her lap. One new message. From Nia. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She just stared at her own hands holding the device. Her wedding band catching the overhead light, dull now, slightly loose on her thinner fingers. She turned the phone over, placed it gently on the table beside her, and returned to cleaning. Later, when Cato came back, he didn't ask about the phone. He saw her by the sink, wiping the last of the flour from the edge of the countertop. The burnt smell still lingered faintly. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She didn't need to. He took the phone, glanced at it quickly, then slipped it into his pocket. She watched him with a gaze so still it made him fidget. I'll be out for a bit, he said, too casually. She nodded once. He left again. This time the door closed softly, almost like guilt. She turned back to the kitchen, her kingdom, her cage, her only place of truth. She reached for the cinnamon jar and unscrewed the lid. She brought it close to her face, inhaled. Still her favorite scent, still hers. She poured a little into her palm, let it sit there. The fine grains stained her skin, fell like brown snow onto her wrist. Her pulse flickered beneath it. I'm still here, she said to no one. Then louder, to the walls, to the oven, to the empty room. I'm still here. She whispered it again and again until her breath ran out. That night, she didn't sleep in the bedroom. She stayed in the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, head resting on the counter like it was her mother's lap. The radio hummed low from the windowsill, some old jazz tune bleeding into the night. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Inside, she began again. Not with flour, but with resolve. Not with forgiveness, but with pride. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to accuse. She'd heard enough, seen enough. And somewhere beneath the silence, the pain and the ash, she felt something shift, something old and strong. The part of her that used to dream, the part that made dough rise even when the world was cold. She would never forget the taste of burnt rolls. But she wouldn't stop baking. Not now. Not ever. The kitchen would love her again, even if no one else did. And as the clock ticked past midnight, the cinnamon jar sat open beside her, its scent rising like hope through the smoke. The knock came just after dawn. One slow rap, then another. Soft, deliberate. Not urgent, but undeniable. Zuri froze mid-pour, her hand trembling slightly as coffee sloshed into the cup. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, as if in quiet sync with the sound at her door. She rolled toward it slowly, the floor creaking beneath the weight of her chair. Her breath came shallow. Cato was still asleep in the back room, his footsteps always lighter now, his presence like a coat draped over a chair that no one sat in anymore. Another knock. She opened the door halfway. The mailman stood in the gray light, rain dripping from his cap, a sealed envelope in his hand, thick paper, a red wax stamp pressed across the back like a scar from another time. "Morning, Ms. Adeyemi," he said, his voice warm but cautious, like he didn't want to disturb something already broken. "Certified delivery, requires a signature." She took it without a word, signed with a pen that shook in her grip, and closed the door before the cold could follow him in. She stared at the envelope. The wax had a deep imprint, an ornate K surrounded by tiny thorns. The paper was heavier than she expected, textured like something from another century. A scent clung to it faintly. Tobacco, aged wood, something ancient and male. Her name was written in ink, not typed, handwritten, careful, decisive. Zuri Adeyemi. She ran her thumb along the edge, heart beating faster now, not with fear, but recognition. Somewhere deep, a bell she hadn't heard since childhood began to ring. She broke the seal. Inside, the letter was short. Turner and Associates Law Office. On behalf of the late Mr. Kwesi Adeyemi, we request your presence to review the terms of his final will and testament. This concerns matters of inheritance. Inheritance? She read the word 3 times before it meant anything. Kwesi. She hadn't spoken that name in decades, a man more myth than memory. Her father's older brother. Sharp suits, silent footsteps. He used to send her wooden toys from overseas when she was a little girl, unpainted, perfectly carved animals that always smelled faintly of cedar. She remembered his voice, low, deliberate, always watching from the edge of the room. He'd vanished before she turned 12. Her father never talked about him, and now he was dead. She looked up at the ceiling. Light flickered faintly from the kitchen, the scent of burnt coffee rising in lazy threads. Her hand gripped the letter tightly. The appointment was scheduled for noon. By 10 she was already dressed. Not dressed for court, not dressed for mourning. She wore the blouse her mother once complimented in the mirror. She wore lip balm that smelled like brown sugar. She left Cato a note. No explanation. He wouldn't ask anyway. The taxi driver didn't speak much. Rain hit the windshield in soft waves as the city blurred past them. Familiar but distant. Buildings she used to know now looked taller, colder. The law office sat on a quiet block, brick and stone, the kind of building that didn't try to impress you, just lasted. Turner's office was up 1 flight, second door on the left. The elevator was broken, so she gritted her teeth and waited as the assistant helped carry her chair up each step. Her arms burned. She didn't let it show. The door opened. A man in his 60s stood to greet her, navy suit, steel gray beard, eyes like weathered glass. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Malcolm Turner. Thank you for coming." He didn't ask how she was, didn't offer condolences, just motioned for her to roll in. "I understand this may come as a surprise," he said, settling behind his desk. "Your uncle passed quietly. No immediate family, no children, but he left instructions, very specific ones." Zuri said nothing, just nodded once, her hands resting on her lap like folded napkins. Turner opened a folder, pulled out 2 sheets of paper, a key, a sealed envelope. "He named you as sole heir." The room blurred for a second. She blinked hard. "What?" Her voice came out smaller than she expected. Turner looked at her with practiced calm. "Everything. His properties, investments, trust holdings, all of it. With one condition." He slid the envelope across the table. "You're to keep the inheritance confidential for 6 months. During that time, you may use a limited amount for living expenses. The rest is to remain untouched. After 6 months, full access." That was his wish. Zuri stared at the envelope. "Why me?" She didn't say it out loud. Turner folded his hands. "He followed your life closely, Zuri. You may not have seen him, but he saw you. He told me once, people who rise from ash don't ask for fire. They just carry it better." Her throat tightened. "What did he die of?" she asked. "Peacefully," Turner said. "He wrote letters, prepared everything. He left a note for you." He handed her a single card, yellowed at the corners. Inside, in that same unmistakable hand, "When the world breaks you, keep something unbroken. A name, a recipe, a morning ritual, anything. I saw yours. I chose you."
No signature.
She pressed the card between her palms and held it like prayer. Turner said, "We'll need you to sign here, acknowledging the terms. You can take time. Read through it." She didn't. She signed. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds hung low, but a soft amber light broke through as if the sky was catching its breath. The taxi ride home felt different. Not richer, not freer, just clearer. She stared out the window, watching people move, umbrellas folding, hands stuffing receipts into coat pockets, someone holding a child's hand too tightly across a puddle. When she reached her street, she paused at the curb, told the driver to wait. She didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, she wheeled herself around the block, slow, deliberate. She needed the air, needed time to let her breath return to its own rhythm. When she finally entered the apartment, it smelled of old coffee and Cato's cologne. He wasn't home. She sat by the oven, looked at it, opened the door, ran her fingers across the wire rack. It was clean, cold, but she didn't flinch. She reached into the cabinet, pulled out the half-empty bag of flour, measured slowly, no rush, let her hands remember what her mind hadn't dared to touch in weeks. She mixed the batter.
Didn't care if it was perfect.
Didn't care if it rose. She just needed the motion, the ritual, the act of creation that asked for nothing but presence. When she placed the dough in the pan, she paused. A single tear slid down her cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was recognition. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen again. This time, it didn't ache. It warmed. She looked out the window. A child across the street jumped into a puddle, laughing, water flying around his boots like a halo. Zuri closed her eyes and smiled. Not wide, not forced, but real. The kind that came from something reborn, not fixed, not healed, but breathing. She turned the dial on the oven. Light flared inside. The past few months had taken things from her. Her legs, her marriage, her faith. But Kwesi had left her something. Not just money, not just land, but a reason. A whisper of belief from someone who had watched her from the shadows and decided she was still worth choosing. As the oven hummed and the scent began to bloom, she whispered, "Maybe he knew I needed a reason." Outside, the clouds parted for just a second. A single shaft of sunlight touched the kitchen window. And Zuri, sitting in that chair, bathed in flower dust and memory, felt the first warm thing in a long time: hope. It was the kind of bouquet that wilted before it ever bloomed. The plastic wrapping crinkled as Cato handed it over. 6 roses, synthetic, tinted red so unnaturally they looked more like warning signs than tokens of affection. The price tag was still half attached to the stem. Zuri stared at it, blinking once, then again. She didn't take it. Not right away. Not because she was angry, but because the weight of cheap forgiveness was heavier than she expected. "I know they're not real," Cato said, his voice too eager, too rehearsed. "But I saw them and thought, you deserve something." Zuri didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, and in that stretch, something cracked gently, like ice beneath a boot. She looked up, her gaze quiet but unwavering. "You came all the way here to bring me that?" He shifted. "I came to say I'm sorry." She let the words fall to the floor like the dust of flour she used to sweep every night.
"I've changed," he said, gripping the bouquet tighter. "I've thought about everything, what I did, how I left. I'm not proud of it."
"You were proud enough to do it." His mouth opened, then shut. He nodded once, the movement stiff, as if swallowing something sharp. Inside, the scent of vanilla hung in the air, wrapped around the low sound of the mixer humming from the kitchen. She had been working when he knocked, kneading dough with deliberate patience. Her apron was still dusted in cinnamon and her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. This time, she hadn't stopped for him. "You look good," he offered weakly. "You're glowing." Zuri raised a brow. "It's butter," Cato chuckled, the sound hollow. "You always were funny." She finally reached for the bouquet, not to accept it, but to lift it gently and place it on the entryway shelf, as far from the warmth of the room as possible. Cato exhaled, glanced around, searching for something in the silence. "I've been thinking about everything we had, about coming back, about making it right." She tilted her head. "Coming back." He nodded, eyes bright with the kind of hope that confused redemption with convenience. She motioned to the couch. He sat. She didn't. Instead, she reached for the tray of shortbread cooling on the counter and transferred them slowly to a tin, each movement calm, methodical, controlled. "What made you remember me now?" she asked. He hesitated. She looked up. "Be honest." His shoulders sagged. "I'm in a bit of trouble." "How much is a bit?" He didn't answer. She picked up a clean towel, wiped her hands, then turned toward the living room table where he had set his phone down earlier. The screen lit up. Her name wasn't on it, but the text was easy to read. "He needs money. You know what to say. I'll wait outside." "Nia." Zuri didn't speak. She simply turned the phone gently around for him to see. He froze. His face flushed. "I can explain." "You don't need to," she said softly. "But I meant what I said." "No, you meant what you practiced." He stood up, panic creeping into his voice. "Zuri, wait. I swear it's not like that. Things got bad. I lost the job. The rent's overdue. I didn't know where else to go." "I'm not the bank." "I know." "I'm not the backup plan." "I know." "I'm not your rescue." His voice cracked. "I don't want your money." "Then why did your mouth say sorry and your phone said strategy?" He lowered his head. Zuri stepped closer. The mixer behind her buzzed once more, then clicked off. The kitchen fell quiet again, like it was listening. "I'm not angry," she said. "I'm not even surprised, but I am done." He opened his mouth again. She pointed gently toward the door. "Don't let the cinnamon follow you out?" He didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he gathered the phone, the keys, the story he had tried to sell. The plastic bouquet still sat on the shelf. He reached for it. She shook her head. "Leave it." He paused, then walked out. No slamming, no final word, just the sound of water dripping from his coat onto her mat. The door closed, and Zuri stood in the center of her living room, her chest full of something not quite sadness, not quite anger, not quite relief. It was peace, quiet, earned, sharp-edged peace. She turned off the kitchen light, then moved to the window. Outside, the rain had started again, slow and steady, like a rhythm the city couldn't quit. On the sidewalk across the street, Nia stood under a bus shelter, arms crossed, phone to her ear. She wasn't crying, just pacing, waiting. Zuri watched her for a moment, then pulled the curtain shut. Not out of spite, but because she no longer needed to see how the story ended. She had already left the page. That night, she sat in her chair beside the front window, sipping tea that had long gone cold. She didn't warm it again. The quiet was enough. The hum of the city, the crackle of rain on the rooftop, the low, pulsing thud of her own heart. The past had tried to sneak back in, and she had opened the door, but only to let it out. Later, she reached for her order book. 2 more entries since noon. A corporate gift box for a downtown firm, a birthday batch of lemon bars for a girl turning 10. She smiled. Not because business was good, but because it was hers. Entirely, unmistakably, fully. She thought of how far she had come, of the nights she couldn't sleep, sitting at the window with a body that no longer obeyed, wondering if she had already lived her only story. But life had whispered back, "No, you're still rising. You haven't even begun." She leaned back, let her eyes fall shut for just a moment, the cinnamon still clinging to her hair, the sugar still on her skin. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, everything was rising. The knock was softer than usual, hesitant, almost embarrassed. Not the kind of knock that asked to come in, the kind that hoped it wouldn't be heard. Zuri looked up from her counter. Flour dust shimmered mid-air in the early sunlight, floating like mist above the cooling trays. The mixer was off, the silence thick with cinnamon and quiet questions. She rolled toward the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her arms still ached from the morning prep, but she didn't mind it anymore. The ache made her feel alive, still moving, still hers. When she opened the door, the sunlight outside flared against a tall figure, backlit like a memory come home. "Hey," he said and smiled. It was Malik. She hadn't seen him in years, maybe longer. He looked older, but in the way that suited him. Silver creeping into his temples, a beard softer than she remembered. But his eyes still laughed before his mouth ever did. He held a small bouquet of sunflowers, half wrapped in newspaper and slightly crushed, like he'd hugged them too tight on the walk over. "Didn't know if you still liked these," he said, glancing down. "You used to steal them from Mrs. Mahdi's garden on the way to school." Zuri stared at him for a second, then laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. Sudden, light, startled out of her like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She stepped aside without a word, and Malik followed her in. The apartment smelled of warm sugar and vanilla extract, the kind of smell that made strangers stop outside without meaning to. On the counter sat 2 cooling racks lined with almond scones and shortbread cookies, their golden edges catching the light like something sacred. He took it all in, the organized mess, the open window letting breeze into the flower storm, the music faint in the background, some old soul song humming low. "You're baking again," he said softly. "I never really stopped," she replied. "Just forgot how to begin." He looked around. "Place looks different." "It's the same." "Maybe it's you that's different then." She didn't answer that, just wheeled herself back behind the counter and started stacking the boxes for delivery. He moved beside her naturally, as if no years had passed, rolled up his sleeves, picked up the twine without asking. They moved in sync like they always used to, her hands folding parchment, his fingers tying knots. She didn't have to explain anything. He just knew. When the last box was sealed, she turned to him. Why are you really here, Malik? He leaned against the edge of the sink, shrugged. I heard what happened. The accident. Cato. The chair. Then I heard nothing. And then last week, a friend at the school sent me a link to some online bakery. The name caught my eye. Zuri raised a brow. Second Chance Bakery, he said, smiling. Thought that was either clever or poetic. Turns out it was both. She looked down, smoothed a wrinkle from the apron fabric. I'm not a storefront anymore, she said. I'm not even a full kitchen. I'm a screen and a spreadsheet. Orders by inbox, deliveries by courier. Still smells like heaven? He walked to the window, looked out. You know, he said, almost to himself, kids at my school, they don't care about money, or status, or whether you can run or not. They care about who remembers their name, who brings them something warm when the day's been cold. He turned back to her. You should sell these online, for real. Make it a thing. Zuri stared. I don't even know where to start. I do. She laughed again, this time slower. Less surprised, more grateful. And why would you do that? Because I believe in second chances, always have. For a moment, the room went still. Just the faint tick of the cooling oven, the hum of the street beyond, a single crumb falling to the floor. Then she nodded. Okay. They started that afternoon. Malik brought his laptop. She brought her notebook, the old one, stained with butter and notes in the margins. They brainstormed names, picked colors, designed a logo with a rolling pin and a halo. They set up the website, added her first few items: lemon lavender loaf, cinnamon braided rolls, sea salt brownies. She refused to put her photo up. Let them taste before they judge, she said. He didn't argue. By the third week, orders were coming in daily. Small at first, 1 box here, 2 dozen there, but steady, always steady. Zuri began waking earlier, mixing quietly in the blue light before dawn, letting the oven warm the air before the sun did. She moved faster now. Her arms grew stronger. She learned shortcuts, how to pivot her chair while pulling a tray, how to balance a bowl on her knees without spilling. Malik came by every evening, sometimes to help, sometimes to eat, sometimes to just sit by the window and talk about nothing. They never talked about Cato, never needed to. One night, as the last order went out, Malik stayed longer than usual. The sky was bruised with sunset. Light scattered across the flower-streaked floor like the last act of a gentle play. Zuri sat beside him on the front porch. The air was cool. Her hands rested on her lap, still dusted in sugar. He turned to her. You know, he said, you haven't smiled like this since we were 17, when we stole that cake from Principal Adair's office. She grinned. We didn't steal it, we borrowed it and ate it all. Still counts. Silence stretched between them, easy now, like cloth on warm skin. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing up. He looked at her for a long second. Zuri, I never really left. That night, after he'd gone, she sat alone in the kitchen. The boxes were empty. The air smelled like orange peel and cooling butter. Her playlist ended on an old Billie Holiday track, voice crackling like a worn record. She stared at the blank order board, then picked up a chalk stick, wrote one word, hope. Below it, she drew a crooked sun. The next morning, her phone buzzed. Another order, then another. Zuri exhaled. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was holding her breath. She opened the window, let the scent of cinnamon drift out to the street. Let the wind carry it. The rain had stopped. The oven beeped. She turned toward it and smiled, not the smile of someone who'd moved on, but of someone who'd come home. And outside, just beyond the window pane, a small boy on a scooter stopped in front of her building, sniffed, turned, and whispered something to his mother. Zuri couldn't hear it, but she knew exactly what he said. It smelled like joy. The first voice Zuri heard that afternoon wasn't a knock. It was a whisper, too close to the front door. She won't see it coming. Then a giggle, soft, female, familiar. Zuri froze behind the curtain. Flour still dusted her apron. Her hands still smelled of vanilla. Outside, footsteps shuffled against the porch tiles. Someone cleared their throat, then knocked. She waited. 3 seconds. 5. Then rolled forward, her hand steady on the wheel. When she opened the door, the sunlight hit them both square in the face. Cato stood there, dripping with rain. He held a bouquet, if it could be called that, of plastic roses wrapped in wrinkled cellophane. The red was already peeling from the petals. Next to him, Nia, a trench coat too thin for the weather, wet hair plastered to her temple, her mouth tight like she was chewing on the words she wanted to say but hadn't been invited to. Zuri blinked. The last time she saw them this close, they were laughing on her doorstep in a dream she used to call a life. "Zuri," Cato started, voice shaky, I don't even know where to begin." "You just did," she said, and turned the chair slightly, not inviting them in, not stepping aside, just moving enough to let the silence stretch. He held the flowers out. They drooped like a question mark between them. "For you?" "They're not real," she said flatly. His hand trembled. Everything's a mess right now. You could afford the lie." His jaw clenched, but the words collapsed inside him. He lowered the bouquet. Raindrops fell from his coat. A thin line of water began to sneak into her entryway. Nia shifted behind him, silent, her eyes scanning the apartment beyond the door. Her fingers, pale and slick, clutched her purse just tight enough to reveal the black rectangle sticking out. A phone, screen face down, half hidden but glowing faintly. Zuri noted. Turned back to Cato. "What do you want?" "I'm sorry. You said that in April." "I didn't mean it then like I mean it now. You meant it to get out of guilt. What's the reason today?" He stepped forward half an inch. "I want to come back." "Back to what?" "I was wrong." "That's not an answer." "I miss you," he said, voice breaking. "Or you miss not drowning." He didn't deny it. She waited. He didn't step back. Then Nia spoke. "Zuri, I know you don't owe us anything." "Us?" Zuri repeated, her voice slicing through the hallway like the blade of a cold knife. Nia flinched, her posture shifting, just enough for the phone to slide deeper into her purse. Her fingers moved subtly, like she was adjusting something. Zuri narrowed her eyes. Her gaze flicked from the screen to Cato's expression. His eyes darted, guilty, not in love, not in pain, just afraid. She inhaled, held the breath until the ache pressed hard against her ribs. "You came to confess," she said finally. Cato's head jerked up. "Yes, and record it," she added, eyes locked on Nia's purse. Silence, like glass cracking under pressure. Nia opened her mouth. Zuri raised one hand. "Don't bother." Then she reached down beside her chair, tapped the wireless doorbell camera controller that Malik had helped her install last month. The little green light blinked once. Recording stopped. "I've been through worse than you," Zuri said, eyes never leaving them. "And I'll survive longer than your lies can last." Cato swallowed. Zuri's voice softened, not out of kindness, but out of a control they would never understand. "I forgive you," she said. He blinked, stunned. "You... what?" "I forgive you, but I will not rescue you." The weight of those words landed louder than any insult. Zuri wheeled herself back an inch. Behind her, on the wall above the open kitchen, hung the sign Malik had carved by hand. "Second chance bakery opening soon. Still bare wood, still waiting for its paint, but bold, upright, unafraid." Cato turned his head slightly to read it. She saw the twitch in his jaw, saw the regret, but not the kind that leads to change. The kind that only shows up when someone realizes the door's no longer open. Nia's voice cracked first. "This is all a misunderstanding. Zuri looked at her. "Do you know what I did when I couldn't walk? I learned how to roll with grace. Do you know what I did when I couldn't knead dough? I taught my hands new ways to shape sweetness. Do you know what I did when you took my husband?" She paused, let the air still. "I baked." Nia's face flushed red. She gripped the bouquet from Cato's hand and hurled it to the ground. "Rot in your pity." Zuri didn't flinch. She reached down, picked up the bouquet herself, brushed the water off gently, straightened the plastic stem, then placed it in the trash beside the door. When she looked back up, her face was soft. Not angry, not cold. "Free?" Cato opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked smaller now, not just wet from the rain, empty. Zuri gave a nod. The bakery's security officer stepped out from the side hallway, a quiet young man in a navy sweater, polite but firm. He didn't ask questions, just motioned toward the door. "Please," Zuri said. Cato and Nia stepped back onto the porch. Rain splashed against their shoes, soaked their hems. Nia turned once more, face twisted with something between hatred and disbelief. But Zuri was already turning away. already wheeling back into the light of her own kitchen. Behind her, the sign caught the afternoon sun just breaking through the clouds. The door closed. The lock clicked. She reached the counter and adjusted the sign slightly, straightened it with both hands. The grain of the wood felt strong under her fingertips. She turned the oven back on, set a tray of dough inside. The smell began to rise again. Cinnamon, lemon zest, vanilla. Rain tapped lightly on the windows. Outside, she heard Nia shouting, Cato's voice trying to hush her. Their footsteps vanished into the street. Zuri exhaled. The room expanded around her like lungs filling with air for the first time. She pressed a hand to her chest, felt her heartbeat, then smiled, not with triumph, with clarity. She had not destroyed them. She had simply refused to carry them forward. And that was victory. A soft chime rang through the apartment. She looked over. A new online order. Then another. Then one more. She rolled over, checked the name. One was from a teacher at the school across the park. One was from a family she used to deliver to before the accident.
One anonymous.
Each one carried something different than pity. Support, recognition, and most of all, belief. Zuri leaned back, letting the scent of baking fill her lungs. Her chair hummed beneath her. The light outside had changed. There was no rage left in her, only resolve. She stared at the new sign. Second chance? The phrase no longer applied to others. It belonged to her. And from now on, no one would speak it in whispers, only with pride. The oven dinged. She reached for the mitt. And in that moment, quiet, unbroken, full, she knew something deep in her bones. Forgiveness is not the same as return, and strength is sometimes as soft as the sound of someone choosing to live well without needing to be seen. The next batch would rise, and so would she. The scent of cinnamon drifted through the rain. Not strong, not sweet, just enough to turn heads. Zuri stood at the front window of her bakery, her hands lightly resting on the edge of the display case, watching the drizzle bead across the glass like it had been waiting 6 months for this very moment. The grand opening banner fluttered above the entrance, held down at both ends by rope and quiet prayers. Inside, the ovens hummed low. Trays lined every surface. Butter had soaked into the walls. The air was soft with warmth. But Zuri's chest held still. Not from fear, not anymore. Just reverence. 6 months to the day since that letter arrived. And now it was time. A customer pushed through the door, the bell ringing in a tone that felt like a benediction. A boy no older than 12 clutched a 5 rand note in one fist and pointed with the other. The jam-filled one, please. Zuri smiled. Which one's calling to you the loudest? He looked at the rose, then tapped the glass. That one. Good choice. She handed it over with the same care she once reserved for wedding cakes. The boy beamed. Behind him, more footsteps. A mother with 2 kids, an elderly man in a coat too big for spring. It began. The crowd wasn't overwhelming, but it was constant and kind. Each person came in with the smell of wet clothes and left wrapped in the scent of sugar and spice. Some asked for her by name, some didn't. Some offered stories about the old Zuri's pastries. Others just smiled and said thank you. Malik stood by the register, wiping counters, taking orders, making jokes in his low teacher voice that somehow made even teenagers laugh without rolling their eyes. He wore a gray apron with a crooked SCB logo stitched in blue, stitched by hand, hers. At noon, the ribbon cutting began. The mayor didn't show. No camera crews, just a folding table, a pair of shears, and 24 community members holding their phones in portrait mode. Zuri wheeled herself to the center. The sky had lightened. Rain misted gently, clinging to her arms like steam. She looked out at the small crowd. Familiar faces, some strangers. A girl from the shelter down the street. The man who fixed her window lock. Malik. Customers who had once been silent, now loud with praise. Then she spoke. Not from a script. Not rehearsed. Just real. There was a time I thought this place wouldn't happen. That my body had forgotten how to stand. That maybe my life had already peaked somewhere I wasn't paying attention. People leaned closer. I used to measure my worth in what I could carry, what I could hold up, what I could walk away from. She paused. But sometimes losing your legs is how you find your wings. The street quieted, only the soft crackle of raindrops against umbrellas. Zuri's eyes found Malik's. Second chance isn't just a name, it's a promise, not just to me, but to everyone who's ever been left out, shut down, counted out too soon. She gestured to her staff, 4 people behind her, each of them wearing matching aprons, each with a story stitched into the folds of their sleeves. One had cerebral palsy. One was a single father rebuilding after addiction. One had aged out of foster care. The 4th used to work the night shift at the diner that never saw the morning sun. They all smiled. Zuri raised the shears. The crowd counted down. 3, 2, 1. She cut the ribbon clean. Applause erupted, soft but full, and just then the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through like a secret finally told. It fell in strips across the sidewalk, bounced off puddles, lit up the glass windows like stained church walls. Inside, the bakery pulsed with life. The bell rang again and again. Orders flew from mouth to mouth. Laughter spilled onto the street. And behind the counter, Zuri moved not with speed, but with purpose. No longer apologizing for the wheels beneath her. No longer shrinking. At 3 o'clock, as the crowd began to thin, Malik placed a small box beside her workstation. She looked at it. Brown craft paper, no label, no ribbon, just folded with care. "What's this?" she asked. He tapped the lid. "Open it." Inside, a pair of soft cream-colored dance shoes, lightweight, flexible, split sole, custom support at the ankle. Her fingers trembled as she picked one up. "I found a woman who makes them for ballet dancers with limited mobility," he said. "I told her your story. She said this pair was hers, from the last show she ever danced." Zuri looked down at her feet. "Malik!" He stepped closer. "I'm not saying you have to wear them, or dance, or even try. I just wanted you to know. Someone out there still believed you might." She touched the shoe's lining, soft like memory, warm like hope. She didn't cry. She smiled. That evening, after the last customer left, she dimmed the lights, turned the sign to closed, let her staff go home with boxes of unsold pastries and tired, happy shoulders. She stayed behind, wheeled herself to the window, watched the street go quiet, then placed the shoes gently on the counter and climbed out of her chair. She didn't walk, not fully, but she stood, one hand on the shelf, the other pressed to the counter, and she placed the shoes against her feet, not to dance, not to move.
Just to feel.
Outside, the rain returned, soft, fine, almost a mist. She opened the window. The scent of cinnamon met the rain again, and something stirred in her chest. Not pain, not even pride. Peace. The peace of choosing to live loud in a body that had been quieted, of breathing without shame, of letting the rain touch her face and not wiping it away. The front bell rang. Once more, she turned. A child stood in the doorway, barefoot, holding something in her hand. Zuri wheeled over. "You okay?" The child nodded, then held out a folded napkin. Inside it, a drawing. Stick figures, a bakery, a sign, and a woman in a chair with a crown. Zuri blinked. "Who drew this?" The girl grinned. "Me, you're the bakery queen." Zuri took the paper, held it to her chest. The rain fell harder now, thunder distant. But inside the bakery, everything was still. She whispered softly to the girl, "Thank you," then looked out the window again. The town lights glowed gold in the mist. She wasn't alone. She never had been. She just needed time, and sugar, and second chances. Behind her, the ovens cooled. The last batch of rolls sat untouched. But the air was still warm, still hers. She reached for the chalkboard, wrote tomorrow's menu. Then, in smaller letters beneath it, "Don't let betrayal define your story." She underlined it once, then leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the cinnamon carry her into the quiet. Sometimes life unravels in silence, not through thunder or tragedy, but in the quiet moments, the unopened message, the door that never clicks shut, the look that lingers just a second too long. And when it does, it can feel like everything we built, trust, identity, even the rhythm of our own breath, collapses under the weight of what wasn't said. But endings aren't always destruction. Sometimes they're invitations, invitations to pause, to choose again, to look at the ashes and say, "This isn't where I stop. This is where I begin differently." We learn that healing rarely arrives with fanfare. It slips in slowly, in the way we fold a blanket over our shoulders at sunrise, in the scent of something warm rising in the air, in the quiet courage to stand again, even when the world only remembers us broken. There's no timeline for becoming whole, no map for rebuilding the parts of us others tried to erase. But the beauty of being human is that we get to decide what grows back in the empty spaces. Sometimes it's strength, sometimes it's grace, sometimes it's the softest, most stubborn kind of joy. Because true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks through forgiveness that doesn't ask for an apology, through choosing peace when anger would be easier, through knowing that dignity isn't something given, it's something claimed. And sometimes, the smallest act, a hand reaching out, a story shared, a kindness returned, becomes the thread that holds us to the world. We become the proof that pain can shape us without defining us, that loss can deepen us without hollowing us out. So wherever you are in your journey, whether you're still gathering the pieces or finally standing in the light, know this: you are not the sum of what was taken from you. You are the sum of what you choose to become next. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling every beat of this story with us. If it moved you in any way, if a single sentence stirred something in your chest, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share your reflections, or tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you'd like more stories like this, ones that speak to the heart, not just the ear, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and stay close. Your presence here means more than you know.